Welcome back to the SHEThrives Influential Women podcast. I am your host, Lori Murphy, and I am an empowerment coach for women. And for many of you that are joining for the first time, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I'm an empowerment coach for women, and how I fell into this path of guiding women is my own personal journey. I am almost 13 years sober from alcohol, and my journey has opened doors to transformation, growth, and a lot of healing. And it also led me to this calling to be able to help women in their journeys of transformation, growth, overcoming fear. And it's something that just lights my soul on fire. And I am so grateful to be able to do such work and have this mission. Um, so this podcast is initially just sharing journey, giving influence to women, lifting them up, positivity, and I love to bring on guests, like I have my special guest today, who I'm so excited to have on here, Stefania. Stefania is amazing. I will get into her, introduction formally in just a moment. I just want to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you never miss another episode. So Stefania Ianno, she is amazing. I have been connecting with her a lot lately, and she's one of the most inspiring women that I have been, blessed to cross paths with. So Stefania is the founder of Breaking Stalking. She's a trained marriage and family therapist and a survivor to thriver. I love that, of stalking. Her passion to educate communities on stalking awareness and prevention grew from her own personal experience and recognizing that there is a lack of knowledge, research, and victim resources surrounding the crime of stalking. Stefania believes that this needs to change, especially after hearing too many stories similar to hers, but ending instead of the loss of life. This is the main motivator for Stefania, raising awareness and teaching others how to recognize stalking and intervene at an early stage can potentially prevent additional crimes from occurring. Stefania's lifelong desire is to develop a career focused on helping others to provide their quality of life and empower themselves. Stefania now shares her experiences, provides her education nationwide, and motivates others to take their lives into their own hands. Stefania is also a part-time strategic life coach and the Women's Opportunity Center in Central New York. Stefania, how are you today?
I'm great. I'm doing very well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you. Like I said, we've been kind of working together and talking, for
Yeah.
like the last month and a half. And,
Yeah.
you know, I have stressed this before about how there is such a need for, you know, having these resources and this support, because I don't think it's as available as you would think.
Yes.
And I would love to hear, tell us a little bit about your story, who you are, how you got here, and, how Breaking Stalking was born.
Yeah. Well, I am a Syracuse native, so born and raised here, and lived here pretty much all my life. But I did go to school in Rochester, New York,
Mhm.
for undergrad and graduate school. I ended up staying there. And so when I was in graduate school, I was actually taking a break from my graduate program. And one day someone came to me and they said, "Hey, this other person is doing all of these things. And the two most concerning things is that the person was talking about guns on the internet that they wanted to buy, and also that they had put a GPS tracker on my car." So this person and I, the person who told me everything, we went to police, we reported, and everything kind of followed from there. Luckily, the university was involved, so that person got arrested pretty quickly, and of course, because a GPS tracker was found on my car, I went to a car place, they lifted it up, they found the device, so that allegation had truly been substantiated. I found it, I took pictures, I took evidence, all of that stuff. And so I think I realized that stalking was a thing in that moment. I actually think about it now and I look back and I realize that I didn't know it was a thing, or I wouldn't have known to name it as stalking had the judge not put an order of protection in place automatically and immediately for me. And on
Mhm.
that order of protection, was, stalking in the fourth degree or whatever it was. And I was
Wow.
like, wow, this is what that is. And I think a lot of people, if it happens to them, they don't recognize that. They don't name it as stalking. They don't realize what it is because we're just not taught about it, right?
Mhm.
And so long story short, I came back to Syracuse. I lived here for a while. Eventually, when it was safe, some of the stalking behaviors were continuing, unfortunately, here in the Syracuse area. But eventually, when it was safe, I went back to Rochester, finished my degree. I knew that was something I wanted to do. I never wanted to regret not finishing that, right? And so 12 years later, I realized there's still not a lot of resources for victims of stalking. There's still some research is getting done these days on people who stalk and stalking situations, but back when I was going to graduate school and I was trying to research it more, there weren't a lot of like academic research papers the same
Mhm.
way there are on things like depression and anxiety and things like that and mental health impacts of those things. So I just thought, I always was thinking in the back of my head, I would love to educate communities on this. We need to know about this. We need to start teaching our high schoolers about this, maybe even our middle schoolers about this. We
Mm.
need to educate the faculty and staff at those schools, the faculty and staff at colleges. A lot of stalking situations happen on college campuses, of course, and we all hear those news reports on 2020 and CBS and all of those of,
Yeah.
college campus student murdered after being stalked for a while. And so I just really felt the education piece and the awareness piece is really where it needs to start to educate more folks and learn how to, or teach people rather, how to recognize stalking and respond to it more proactively than our society already does. And that's to say, it's very little, right? That our society responds and reacts to it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think there's um, I mean, misinformation, but a lot of times folks are like, well, nothing physical has been done. There hasn't been a break in, there hasn't been this, there hasn't been that. So we can't do anything.
Mm.
And that's often a big barrier, I think, that a lot of victims end up encountering. And so either they don't make a report or they feel unheard,
Mhm.
right? So they don't
Right.
try to pursue it or try to pursue charges, or maybe they don't try to pursue an order of protection or different things like that. But stalking is technically a crime in all 50 states. There are laws in all 50 states about it. So if you technically look on the books, right, you can
Yeah.
see it written there. And it's going to vary from state to state, but there are laws that exist around that. So I think we really need to be looking at those laws and advocating for ourselves and advocating for others and saying, hey, there really is something going on here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you said there's a lot of, misinformation and misconceptions. Some people
Yeah.
aren't necessarily aware of if it's even happening to them. So,
True.
what type of, what can you say to clarify, to
Yeah.
kind of let women know, men even,
Yeah.
whoever's listening to this podcast,
All
let them
people.
know that okay, like this is the facts, this is what to look for,
Yeah.
and really what they can do about it.
Yeah. So a variety of things, right? And stop me if I go off into the ethers
The
here.
floor is yours, my dear.
And there's just so much to it, but I'll try to be
Yes.
concise. So of course you make a good point. We can only know what we're observing or experiencing, right? I happen to have been lucky where someone came to me and said all of these things are happening. Of course, there were little things that I recognized in this person's friendship with me, but I didn't see them going to my car and putting that GPS tracker on. I never caught them doing that, right? But looking back now, I understand the situation. Anyway, so a really commonly accepted what we say behavioral definition of stalking is
Mhm.
when one person is essentially doing a bunch of things, which I'll clarify later, towards another person that are unwanted, that are fixated, that are obsessed, you could say. And that person obviously is not accepting of those things. They want it to stop. And it's also potentially causing that person to be scared and
Mm.
or causing them to suffer substantial emotional distress. And the part in there that I didn't mention is that it would cause a reasonable person to feel fear or cause them to suffer substantial emotional distress. And that's really important to say because it really makes the difference sometimes when a victim is experiencing something, because sometimes we might not express fear and say, oh my gosh, this is so scary. It could be a variety of other feelings. But let's say a police officer is investigating a situation and they can recognize as a reasonable person on the outside that, hey, if someone was having someone else drive by their house 10 times a week, send them 20 emails every week, text them 20 times every day. Maybe that person's showing up at their gym unannounced and they don't go to that gym. Maybe this person's showing up at this other person's place of work unannounced and they have no reason to be there, especially.
Mhm.
So, all of these sorts of behaviors can constitute what we call the course of conduct of stalking. So, any reasonable person could look at that situation and say, that would make me scared.
Yeah.
Even if maybe a victim or a survivor is not saying, I'm scared and this is scaring me. But oftentimes, for most people, they are experiencing that fear, right? And they can name it, but sometimes they can't.
Mhm.
So, in terms of those stalking behaviors, it can be any of those things that I mentioned, but it could also be a really, really wide variety of behaviors. And sometimes in a lot of stalking cases, we see some really bizarre behaviors. And I don't have to go into the nuances of that, but essentially, it's mostly the unwanted communication of any type, whether it's online, text message, showing up, calling, coming to the house, coming to the workplace, coming to the places that you might frequent, like gyms or cafes, school campuses, things like that. Obviously, it can also be utilizing tracking devices like the one I mentioned in my situation, or installing spyware on someone's phone or computer. It can even stalking can even happen if someone is breaking into someone's house and taking things or even leaving things, which is a bizarre thing that we see sometimes in stalking cases where they won't take anything or break anything, but they'll move something around in the house just to make the person know that they were there, right?
Hmm.
And
That's interesting.
yeah, and it's really bizarre, and I think it just kind of further feeds into making the person kind of feel like they're, for lack of a better phrase, losing their mind, right? It can be a lot of mind games to
Right.
control and manipulate and scare, essentially. And some of that is can cross over into other crimes because obviously you break into someone's house, that's breaking and entering. That's a different type of crime. So it can start with stalking and it can escalate to other things as well. So,
Right.
and it can be very like just a very complicated and bizarre situation when people experience stalking.
Yeah. So if you're basically like, so let's say you have somebody who is unwanted and they're showing up in your spaces, right? Like, and it's becoming to be more noticeable. That should be like that very first indication of, hey, red flag here, you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't go on to the part two of the part two of the question, right?
No, that's all
I told
right.
you I would go off into
I
the
love it. You can go off all you want, but no, it's
um
like because I feel like, you know, if we're aware, we can avoid going into the next stages of breaking into your household, tracking
exactly.
devices, or even threatening your safety.
Yes, yeah. There's a whole other variety. Yes, 100% making threats, sending gifts, sending like bizarre things to someone in the mail. Like there's a whole slew of other things. Yeah, that can also be part of that course of conduct of stalking that yes, can get scarier, right? Especially
Yeah.
when it comes to the threats or even utilizing weapons, unfortunately. Things like that definitely escalate as we know and see every day in our news stories. So yeah, so if someone is experiencing these things, right? There's a
Mhm.
number of things that we often say to do. But I always preface this by saying every stalking scenario is going to be different. Every relationship is going to be different, whether
Mhm.
it's, a friend stalking a friend, a former intimate partner, a current intimate partner, a neighbor, a family member even, unfortunately, of course that happens as well. So it just kind of depends. And I think the number one thing I always say is for people to just listen to their instincts, right? If
Yeah.
something doesn't feel right and you're like, I think I should do this, but there's that second voice in your head that's saying, I'm not really sure. Well, usually the first voice is right. Like I always say, instincts exist for a reason. And oftentimes that reason is to protect us. And so listen to those instincts, right?
Mhm.
And so the next thing that we usually say is to tell the person who's doing the behaviors to stop. And we usually say, tell them once, be very clear, be very concise, tell them, stop doing X, Y, and Z. And you can tell them through ever, like in whatever manner that makes sense to you, whether it's through a text message or an email, or if they show up and you tell them. And the reason that we often say tell them once and then stop it at that is because, of course, you don't want to reinforce them continuing to contact you, right? If
Right.
you keep responding to them and keep responding to them,
Mhm.
um, it's always that example of like if they text you 50 times and you don't respond and they text you the 51st time and you respond, well, it just teaches them that all they have to do is text you 51 times and then you'll respond, right? And at the same time, completely I completely acknowledge that sometimes that's difficult, especially if you say have a co-parenting situation, right? If
Mhm.
someone's stalking someone else, but they're also co-parents with kids. So that's why I say every situation is different. So listen to
Sure.
your instincts, tell them clearly and concisely to stop, and then of course you want to document everything. There are
Absolutely.
documentation logs out there that exist. You want to document what the incident was, the day, the time, if there were witnesses, if you reported to police. And that's another thing too is, if things are escalating, try and make a police report. Unfortunately, police in different cities and states are always going to approach things differently.
Yeah.
As much as I hate to say it, people don't always have luck with police, but I still think that you should try. And if you are able to report, make sure you get a copy of that report. So the documenting, the reporting, and other safety things that you can do if you're concerned about them coming to the house and things like that. So, you can get a ring,
Sure.
you can get security, items like that. Going back to the age-old advice of like walk with friends, don't walk alone, like be aware of your surroundings, take a look at what's happening. As much as I hate to say, that I mean, it is a tip that sometimes you want to vary your routes to work. You can vary your routes and take different, streets and routes to the different places that you go. That's like a standard piece of advice. It's not my favorite because of course you're saying, "Hey victim, survivor, you have to change everything about your life," right? As opposed to the person who's doing the stalking actually being
Sure.
caught and held accountable, right?
Yeah.
Of course, that's
Yeah.
what we really want, but unfortunately, in these types of cases, it's hard to get to that point sometimes.
Absolutely. Now, what's coming to mind for me is with your own personal experience, were there signs that were happening before your friend came to you and said, "Hey, this is what's happening"? Were there things that were happening that your stalker was doing that you weren't aware of at that time? Like what was going on for you?
Yeah, so I was, like, dating someone else at one point, and, like, sometimes they would say inappropriate things once in a while, and I was like, "Okay, maybe they were just kind of jealous or, like, wanted to date me." I mean, I will be honest about that. It was that sort of situation where I didn't wanna date them in the end, and so we stayed friends, right? Um, and yeah, like, I was playing tennis with someone else one time, and the person showed up, and so I was like, "Oh, that's really weird. Like, what a bizarre coincidence that we would end up on the same tennis courts. That's strange. I was actually on a radio show with them, and after the fact, I mean, I think I was still kinda, as much as I hate to say it, young and naive, and they said a couple of things on that radio show that one could take as sexual harassment, and I think in the moment, I was just so surprised that it, like, didn't even register. So between
Mhm.
that and the showing up and some other comments, and me being at someone's house one night and I heard a motorcycle rev their engine really, really loudly, and this is the example that I give about that instinct piece. I was at my friend's house and I heard a motorcycle drive by, rev the engine really loud, and I immediately was like, that's them, because I knew
Mhm.
that they had a motorcycle. And I was like, that's them. And then I was like, no, stop it, Stefania. That is not them. Like, you're being insane. It's like, late at night, it's like 11:30 at night, or just hanging out. Like, what are the odds that that person would know I was at my friend's house at that time and drive by and do that? And so it was these sorts of really bizarre things that happened
Yeah.
that after the fact I was right about. Like it was that person,
Mhm.
and that all came out because the person who stalked me was having conversations with this friend who came to me and told me everything.
Mhm.
And they admitted to doing all of those things. And
Wow.
so it was so validating for me to know that I wasn't out of my mind, right? That my
Yeah,
instincts were right, that it was them doing those things. Um, and that my instincts were correct. And, I mean, it is what it is in the moment, but I think
mhm.
that's the instinct lesson that I've learned from that, of like oftentimes your first thought can be the correct thought, right?
Absolutely,
So yeah,
absolutely.
there were, but can you see how those things were so subtle
Yes,
that like you wouldn't, like I wouldn't put that together? Why would I have
right.
put all of those things together and been like, is this person stalking me? Because it's such a fine line, right?
Exactly, exactly, and, the scary part of all of that is because it was so subtle, you weren't even you were so oblivious to the more severe things that were going on, like the tracking
Yeah.
device on your
Yeah, of
vehicle. I mean,
course.
that had to have been terrifying to go through and to learn about, and
Yeah.
hearing that he's searching for weapons on the internet.
Right. Yeah. I think it was. Yeah. I mean, when my acquaintance or friend sent me those conversations, I was like, okay, this is definitely serious. Yeah. And there was an immediate sense of, did he buy a gun,
Mhm.
Um and yeah, and finding that device was very bizarre. I remember being at the car place that I went to next to the place where I worked, because at the time I was working at a restaurant. And even all the, 40, 50 something year old dudes that worked at the car place, like they were freaked out, because they had never experienced that before. Someone
Yeah.
coming in and saying, "Hey, this is really weird, but can you please put my car up on the lift and look for something that doesn't belong there, like maybe a GPS tracker?" Like I think other people have experienced that, but those particular folks, had never been presented with that request, right?
Sure.
And so as I watched them take something from the back of my car, of course they had cameras rolling as they always do in the car place, and to prove that like they didn't mess with the car, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, he just put it on the floor and was like, he treated it like a bomb, to be honest. That's kind of the thing that sticks in my head. He was like, "I'm just going to put this here. I'm not going to touch it. I have to call my regional manager now and let them know that this thing happened." And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. It was just a very bizarre scenario. And of course, I called the police back to say that it had been found, because unfortunately, I think the first police officer that I reported to didn't offer to check my car and pretty much didn't believe me that a GPS tracker was probably on my car, because he said, quote, "Well, even the GPS trackers that we use as police, we have to go back and like retrieve them to charge them." And I thought, okay. But yeah, come to find out, this person did go back to my car a number of times to replace it on my car. And that's how he knew I was at those tennis courts, to come full circle. So
Because he
that
tracked you.
was that other thing. Yeah. And that's how he knew.
Wow.
Yeah. So as I'm putting all these pieces together, the picture's becoming clearer, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, okay, that makes sense now. That makes sense now. So yeah.
Yeah. Did
Yeah.
you feel at any point when all of this was going on that you had to isolate? Like, did you feel like you
Mm.
were exposed and just needed to like hide?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, the series of 3 days where everything happened after I found the GPS tracker, because the university was involved in security and all of that. I mean, like I had, because of the talk of guns too, I had like an escort to my house that like put me up at like a safe hotel that they must have just like funds for emergency situations apparently.
Mhm.
So like yeah, they like whisked me away over there until the person could be apprehended. And then my parents happened to be coming to town that weekend. So, of course, I had to tell them everything. And that was incredibly shocking and upsetting to them. Of course, them being, like indirect victims. as there are often many indirect victims of stalking and other crimes, of course.
Mhm.
And yeah, so I moved out of Rochester for my own safety, but also the safety of my housemates. Like I didn't want anything to happen to them. So I did. I didn't go back to school the way I had planned to, left housemates, left job, and did pretty much isolate for a series of months in Syracuse because it's like, what is my life right now? This is, insane and really upsetting while we tried to figure everything out and figure out next steps and like what we had to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really is a disruption to your life and your plans, and it's almost like
Yeah.
within an instant, your whole life just got
Yeah.
flipped upside down because of one person
Mm,
and their but their potential to cause harm, right?
yeah.
And that, it's so good that you were fortunate enough to have someone come to you and tell you that
Yeah.
this is what's going on. So at some level, having that brief disruption was also a lifesaver at the same token.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I always think about that person, especially when I tell this story and I call them my angel really. And that's not a typical terminology I would use personally. But yeah, I mean they did probably save my life. And maybe even other people's lives. Like we just can't know. But I'm so grateful that they came to me and they said something, which is a huge lesson to other folks too, is to, speak up for other people, speak up for yourself even if something just feels a little off or a little weird. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the whole if you see something, say something phrase that we have. Um, I say the same thing about these sorts of scenarios too. And especially if it escalates to that level. Like, of course, at that point, the person was talking about guns and a GPS tracker. So I think this other acquaintance slash friend was like, okay, I need to say something.
I, and I really want to hear because like you went through all of this, and of course, now your life's been flipped upside down. You had to leave school, which eventually you went back,
Yes. Yep.
and you
Hmm.
eventually is that when you decided to take your life back and go from survivor to thriver?
That's a really great question. I don't think it was like a specific moment like that. I think it's been a series of years where eventually I was like, okay, I'm no longer a victim survivor. I identify as a thriver. I think that was definitely a really big point in the journey though, to say, okay, I'm going to go back to the city where it all happened. They're no longer there. So I feel safe-ish, but of course, like memories and weirdness and all of that exists. But I didn't want that to stop me because I knew I didn't want to
Mhm.
have any regrets, as I mentioned earlier, about not getting my degree. So I think that was one kind of empowering moment in the journey. And I think
For
some other
sure.
empowering moments I ended up taking this random like writing course in Rochester through this woman I had met. And I think I didn't realize that I really needed to get some stuff out, And so I think
Yeah.
I used that writing course to like write letters and write different things and get all of that stuff out of me and kind of get the anger out and get the betrayal out and all of those kind of negative feelings. So I feel like
Yes.
that was one part of the healing journey as I utilized that writing course. And I think just so that was one way to find community, as I say. And I think another way I found community was just randomly by having conversations with people who would then say, oh gosh, that like a stalking situation also happened to my sister or me or
Mhm.
someone in my family or this friend. And I started to realize that it was a lot more prevalent than I think we know or we
Yeah.
think. And so I was like, oh, I'm really not alone in this, right? Because I think a
Right.
lot of times victims of crime think that they're alone. And I
Mhm.
think stalking in particular, with being so subtle and so difficult to prove sometimes, you might even more so have that isolated feeling. And it could feel
Sure.
very like weird and bizarre. So just knowing that I wasn't alone in that and taking the writing course. Um, and I think just wanting to spread the word really maybe fully put me into that thriver zone of um wanting to share my story more, and just wanting to help other people, I think. And at the same time, I mean, I was studying to become a marriage and family therapist. I always knew I wanted to help people. And then I decided, so even though I got my degree, I decided that maybe that wasn't the path I wanted to take long term. And then I realized this is it. This is what I want to do in terms of spreading that awareness, providing the education to folks. I've always, not that I've really taught officially, like as a teacher in any sort of capacity, but I recognized over time I've always enjoyed, helping people learn things essentially. And so I
Yeah.
thought, what better way than to teach folks about this so they can empower themselves, be proactive if it ever happens to them or someone else that they know. And even if it never does happen to them, of course, right? Because that's my hope, is that no one experiences this. Even if it doesn't, at least they'll have some education on the topic anyway, I guess.
Absolutely, because it might, if you, even if it doesn't benefit them directly, there
Yeah,
could be somebody that they know that
exactly.
may have this experience. And because you got on top of, like I met you at the Rochester Women's Expo, and you were the first keynote speaker to get up on stage, and you talked about breaking stalking. You talked about, this very topic, and you educated those in the room. And because you did that, now they know how to be aware, and they also know how to help somebody else if they fall into that place. And I mean, they also know now that there is somebody that they can talk to, right?
Yeah,
Talk
yeah,
about
absolutely.
some of the resources that you provide with Breaking
Sure.
Stalking and the education and support.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely going in a variety of directions, which is great. So first and foremost, I offer the educational presentations. So like the awareness and the education piece of it. So going into the high schools, the colleges, even victim service agencies, if their staff wants more training, if they've already had some training or even an initial training,
Mhm.
around the stalking awareness and prevention. So, kind of like we talked about today, but I dig even deeper into stalking behaviors, maybe stalking laws, warning signs, red flags, different things like that. And then even more about what to do. And of course, I tailor these presentations, whether it's for law enforcement or for college faculty and staff or at high schools, and specifically with the high schools too. I love presenting there because I think they don't have as much education around it. And I think trying to implement some stalking response protocols with their students, it can be kind of tricky since everyone's there in a small, group to go to school.
Yeah,
And I'm totally like going off in a left field with this, but
that's okay.
but I just recognized that there might not be that education at that level a lot of times. And so I think getting into those high schools to really start to teach it and to teach our kids, especially before they go to college, right, about this education and what to look out for. I've discovered that I'm particularly passionate about that. So it's mostly the educational presentations. I can give longer workshops for folks who might already have had some basic trainings,
Mhm.
but we just go even deeper. So that's a little bit more for law enforcement or victim service agencies, and staff, if they're working specifically with victims that come their way. And additionally, starting on September 17th for 10 weeks at 6:30 p.m. with Safe Space CNY. That's a local nonprofit here in Syracuse, that offers a variety of support groups to our community. And they're a really great organization. So Safe Space CNY, we are collaborating, and I'll be facilitating the Survivors of Stalking support group starting on September 17th. So that just kind of organically happened, right?
That's awesome.
In realizing that there aren't a lot of spaces for survivors to come together to talk about what they've gone through and how they're healing from it and how they can heal from it and continue to go from victim to survivor to thriver.
Right.
Because I love that particular narrative. Um, and so I do like to be specific to say that that is geared towards folks who are not currently experiencing stalking, but perhaps they did in the past. And maybe there's still some lingering trauma or difficulties in their life. So we don't focus as much on current tips or tactics, etc., as to how to deal with the situation because it's geared towards folks who are out of it, but
Mhm.
who are maybe still dealing with the lingering effects of being a survivor of stalking. So I just
So,
like to be kind of clear about that. So you can go
yeah.
to safespacecny.org and sign up for the September 17th session of that, which will take place in person, and more details when you sign up.
Absolutely. And if somebody that's listening is not in the Syracuse area and they are located, maybe even out of New York State,
Yeah.
are there resources that you provide or even one-on-one resources where people can come to you for support or
Yeah, so it's
anything
it's kind
like?
of a mix. I don't quite offer private consultation right now, though that is something I'm thinking of doing in the future.
Mhm,
However, if you go to breakingstalking.com and you go to the resources page, that is like kind of like a one-stop shop where I list other specific stalking awareness and prevention organizations that are national, where
mhm,
people can find more resources, more support lines, and different things like that. So, Stop Stalking Us in LA, stalkingawareness.org. Those are all listed on my website, as well as national help hotlines that all like, so like myself and all of these other anti-stalking organizations, we list these specific hotlines. So there's and of course, I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's like a national victims hotline that you can call in if you're a victim of stalking. And so those hotlines help victims directly. So you can chat with them via like text or on the phone.
mhm,
Unfortunately, the specific anti-stalking awareness organizations do not help victims directly because they are
mhm.
similar to me in terms of like the awareness and the education, but they do have a lot of resources. They have the documentation logs, they have other links to even more resources. So I would say just go to breakingstalking.com, the resource pages, and you can pretty much find everything there, including the chat and the phone helplines.
Awesome. That's
Mhm.
very cool. I think what you're doing is incredible.
Thanks.
I think just giving people out there just that knowledge that, okay, there's something I can do. Like, oh, this is what I have to look for, and to know that they're not alone and there are resources. Because when you were looking for resources, did you find that there really wasn't, is that when you found there wasn't much out there?
There really wasn't. And I don't even remember at that time if I even went online and Googled anything. I mean, maybe that probably would have been the smart thing to do. I'm not sure if in 2011, 2012, I don't even know what would have come up, right? Eventually I found stalkingawareness.org, and they're really the national forerunners, I will say, of this topic and the information and resources that they provide. Um, but, as much as I hate to say it, I did go to a local organization in person, and it was kinda like, "Well, we don't really know what we can offer you right now." And also, I feel like they had mentioned, because I wasn't technically in a romantic relationship with this person,
Huh.
that their services were potentially limited. And I think that's another big thing that victims of stalking encounter is just because there might not be an intimate partnership, that it's like they're excluded from getting help and services sometimes in some
Yeah.
places. And
I
I
think
just think
it's yeah,
that's
I think
horrendous.
it's important to stress that you do not need to be in a romantic relationship or have had any type of romantic encounter for
Mhm.
something like this to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody can just be intrigued by you,
Right. Right.
you know, and and I think going to colleges, especially, I think now, correct me if I'm wrong. I think that that's something that's common that happens on college campuses, especially because, there's
Yeah.
not a lot of adults around, and a lot of these,
Mhm.
young people are walking their campus alone.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Actually, the most recent statistics that we have at least say that the age range of 18 to 24, so you're definitely right on target. The age range of 18 to 24 is the age range that experiences stalking behaviors the most. So yeah, it is happening a lot on those college campuses, which is why it's so important for, folks to be educated in that realm.
Yeah. Could you tell a parent
Mm.
that could be listening whose daughter or son are at college right now? And they and they're what can you tell them as far as, what to look for in your child during this? Because I'm sure it's not something that kids go right to their parents with.
Sure. Yeah, that's absolutely I'd
And
say that's probably right on track. Yeah.
maybe out of fear that they're going to have to go home.
Sure, yeah. No, that
Yeah.
that totally makes sense. I mean, I acknowledge that everyone's parent-child relationship is going to be different. I will say I think at one point I even said to my mom when like some weird things were happening, I was like, "Oh, so and so and I like are just kind of taking a break from our friendship." Right? And it's like, "Huh, that's a like is that a weird thing to say?" Like, I don't know. And I think my mom was like, you told me that and that was fine. Like, I didn't want to make more of a big deal of it and like freak you out or something. Of course, these are like very vague memories. So I would say just, listen to your child if they are coming to you and saying something, and maybe don't be afraid to delve further into the issue and to kind
Yes.
of maybe even like do like a vague screening, right? Like, oh, can you tell me more about that? Or what do you mean? Or did they do something that was concerning? And just be aware of like the resources that are on campus too. If your kid maybe doesn't feel comfortable talking to you, maybe be like, oh, well, don't forget there's university counseling services, or there's the student center, or, encourage your kids to go to a faculty member that they trust or have a good relationship with, or, don't be afraid to like share make sure like share things with your sorority sisters, right? Your fraternity brothers, if you're talking about Greek life. um, yeah, just encourage them to utilize the resources that are at their disposal, but also be an informed parent. Maybe you can ask a couple of screening questions to kind of delve a little bit deeper into it. And of
Yeah.
course, if there's ever like, if someone's recognizing a severe scenario, I mean, I would say some folks might think it's overparenting, but I think of some of the situations that have happened out there that we've seen in the news, and of course, I am not victim blaming or blaming parents. I think parents sometimes don't know what to do in a situation, but I'd tell parents to listen to their own instincts. And if they want to fly across the country because something's happening to their kid, I would say do it because
Yeah.
you just never know. And that's not to instill fear, but that's to empower the parents to still be involved in their
Yeah.
students' lives, because in their kids' lives, because they are still flourishing and growing adults who are really still developing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Stefania, you're incredible. And I think that the vision that you have, the where how far you want to take this is going to just continue to grow and thrive. And you know, you're getting out there and you're spreading this message and that you're really helping so many. And I think that that's incredible. So thank you for doing what you do.
Thanks. Well, thank you for being part of me helping to spread that message, because I appreciate this time, and every little bit helps, right? And I always go back to saying, if I offered, and I do offer free community presentations periodically throughout the year, and if one person shows up, that's fine, because if I helped that one person, then that's great, and that's really how I view it.
Absolutely. I say that all the time. If I'm helping one person, then I'm
Yeah.
serving my mission of doing what I'm supposed
Yeah.
to be doing. And I think that that's awesome, And do you have any upcoming in like I know you have the support group going, but do you have any upcoming platforms where you will be doing any workshops or courses even online?
Yeah, so I am thinking about also offering possibly. This is probably going to be 2025 down the road, but maybe a virtual support group for folks who are currently experiencing a stalking situation. So that's going to look very different than providing that in person to people who are survivors and no longer in the midst of a situation. So that's kind of further down the road, because I know that there are a lot of folks out there who might be in need of that. And so I'm trying to configure how that's going to look and how
Hmm.
that's going to best serve people.
Sure.
And also I'll be able to help folks, hopefully all over the nation who might not have anywhere else to go. So that is
Yes.
potentially in the works, the in-person support group that I talked about. And of course, every January for the past 20 years has been National Stalking Awareness Month. So I am looking to maybe collaborate with some other local organizations and have more of a widespread campaign this January 2025.
Mhm.
So that's kind of just getting up and running. But yes, a lot of preparation for the in-person support group because I want to make sure I focus on that. And I'm
Yeah,
also focusing right now on connecting with those high schools for the upcoming school season to present to them.
that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks.
I think 2025 will definitely be your year. It sounds like you have a lot coming up. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Um, so if anybody listening wants to be able to follow you, to
Yeah.
know when you have new resources available,
Yeah,
or they just
absolutely.
want to connect with you, where
Yeah.
can they find you?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, breakingstalking.com, go on the website, look at all those good resources. You can message me on my website, but you can also follow me legally well, not as I say, that's actually stalkingawareness.com. You can follow them legally too. But I'm Breaking Stalking is on Instagram. Breaking Stalking is also on Facebook. So I pretty much share everything on both of those platforms. So if you tune into there, you'll see real recaps of every month what I've done. You'll see some fun Instagram lives. You'll see my collaborations with other folks, other organizations, and even this podcast, for example. Obviously, I'll post that, and then anything else that's upcoming.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Stefania, thank you so much for your time and for being, a part of this with me today. I'm very excited to be able to share this message and to share these resources with people. Like we said, it's needed. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful for you.
Yeah, I'm
And
grateful for you as well. Thank you so much. And
you're
I also just want to give a quick plug to you because I also just want to say we have been working together the past couple of weeks and I've been,
yes.
doing some coaching sessions with you. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Oh,
And those have been
thank you.
really super helpful. So I just wanted your audiences to also know that you're awesome and super helpful and go work with Lori.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate you saying
Yeah,
that.
of course. Yeah,
Well, so everybody, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you so much for Stefania. And we actually are going to get off and do a session now.
that's right.
Our
Yes,
conversation's going to continue.
that's correct.
So I will be sharing contacts for Stefania in the description of this podcast episode, as well as my contact information. If you want to reach out, you just, schedule a call and just, connect. You can find me on Facebook at Lori A. Murphy, Empowerment Coach for Women, or you can email me at M as in Michael C, empowerment at gmail.com. Thank you so much, everybody. And as I always say, let go of fear and let your spirit shine.